And we're so glad that you're joining us today. We are changing things up a little bit today. Jackie's not with me to record, but I have my two beautiful daughters with me. To my left, is that correct on this screen? Is my younger daughter Louise Brighton, and underneath us, not because she's underneath us, but just so happens to show up in this screen, is our older daughter Brittney Rorda. And they happen to be, I am going to be the guest today, and they happen to be the ones who are going to lead off this 1950s fun chat today. And of course, we're doing this 1950s fun chat because of that little book that you see in the upper right hand corner as you view us. And it has that little white deal on it. That's that national award. We're so grateful for the book. And doing the fun chat is a fun way to keep telling the story of the 1950s from the guests that we have. So girls, it's time to take it away. And so Brittney or Louise, who's going to start to ask your mama some questions about the 1950s?
I can kick it off.
All right.
As I've considered the discussion today and looked back through the book and thought back through at least my life, and I was there for a good portion of Louise's too, but to think through what most interests me, and I come back to my grandma and grandpa, so your mom and dad, and having more insight because we didn't have much time with them.
Yes, they died early in your lives.
Yeah, and the book I think has been very heartwarming for us to get to know them, at least on paper, and to know about their lives. For you, and I'll ask this for both grandpa and for grandma. For grandma, we can start there. What in your mind for your mom was the most defining moment in her life?
In her life as a wife and a mother, or her life before she was married, or in the 1950s?
From the time that you have known her, when she was alive, from the time you could remember memories with your mom until the time she passed.
Okay. Starting out in the 1950s, of course, being born in 1950, I had that whole decade to become acquainted with both of my parents and love them. It wasn't a learning to love. It was just natural to love them. And by the end of that 1950s decade, when I was 10 years old, so much had already happened in life. One defining moment that is interesting really for our community, our Menoken, North Dakota community, was the fact that our Menoken grade school did not have kindergarten. And so it was really up to the parents to make sure that we were prepared for school. And more than likely, it was the mothers in the family. Most of them were stay-at-home moms at that time. And interestingly enough, of course, I didn't know how to read. That was not unusual at that time. When I started first grade, I did not know how to read. I could count to 10. I knew the basic colors. I certainly didn't know how to count money or didn't know vowels or consonants or anything like that. My mind was a blank screen when I started first grade with Mrs. Violet Arntz at Menoken School. But what is probably most memorable through the decades of my life with Mom is the fact that she was a woman of strength. She didn't, in our family, from what Jackie and I recall, she did not necessarily say, do it this way, do it this way. We learned by her example. And that is so true, especially in the kitchen and how I learned to bake. We had a kind of a three pole stool, kind of a rickety stool that sat in the kitchen. And I would sit on that and watch her as she mixed the ingredients for bread, or she mixed the ingredients for cookies, or made a pie. And I was fascinated by how she did that. And that's how I learned to be the baker that I am today. Correct measuring techniques, use dry ingredient measurements for dry ingredients, the glass Pyrex measuring cups for liquid ingredients, when to stir, when to fold, when to blend, how to use the mixer. That was learning by example. Same way with sewing. When of course, getting into 4-H as a 10-year-old, that was the next step. But learning how to sew it was not so much in following those pattern instructions. She would teach us what the pattern instructions were all about. And then after the first time showing me how to lay pattern pieces onto a piece of fabric, then we just kind of learned from there. If we ever had any questions, we'd ask her. But she was a person who really taught by example all through life. And I can't say that she probably kept her mouth closed better than I do, because there are instances when she might wanted to have spoken out with her thoughts, but perhaps out of deference to Dad or deference to the whole situation, she learned to swallow a lot of words and got along with the situation.
So, of those many things, what's the most defining moment?
One defining moment? I can't think of any defining moment, Brittney. Perhaps the time, and I've noted it in the book, when I was sewing, as you girls both know, I do not like the heat. I get kind of upset when I get really, really warm. And this was a summer day. We didn't have air conditioning in our house. The sewing machine, the Treadle Singer sewing machine, was in Mom and Dad's bedroom. Mom was out hanging clothes up on the line, and I was sewing with wool, and this for a 4-H project. So it was a piece of fabric with plaid, that was plaid. And of course, if you're an excellent seamstress, you match at every seam, at every pocket, wherever there is a coming into of another piece of a pattern that goes up next to another piece, you match those plaids so that it looks like it's all one piece, a solid plaid piece of fabric. Well, I could not get this to match. I couldn't get it to match. I had torn out that side seam probably about 3 times, and I was getting very frustrated. The seam ripper became a pretty good friend of mine. So I went out to the clothesline, and I knew when I went out there that what she was going to say, because Jackie and I don't want to call her a perfectionist, but she had standards, and she expected us to respect those standards and to learn those standards, because what you do, you always want to do your best, put your best foot forward, especially if it was going to be for a competition. And so I took it out there with the threads, the plaids not matched, and she said to me, "Well, what do you think?" And I didn't have to answer her. I just walked back in the house and took that seam out until I got it correct. So that comes to my mind as a defining moment with Mom.
Well, I can also jump in now. One of my questions, I guess, is we hear many stories about what you and Jackie experienced growing up with Grandma and Grandpa, and going back to sewing and baking and cooking. I wanted to ask, and I guess this is in a roundabout question, but my question is did you have any catastrophes in your baking or sewing experiences? And mainly because I know that I had many catastrophes when I was learning how to bake for 4-H as well. So
yes, one of the first items that I baked was a recipe for lace cookies. And if there are any viewers who are from the era of the 1950s and remember the radio homemaker Martha Bolson, she also had a cookbook, and it was a black hardcover loose leaf cookbook. Mom had 2 basic cookbooks in her drawer, that one and of course the red and white checkered Better Homes and Gardens one. And so I would happen to be looking through recipes in Martha Bolson's cookbook, and I came across this recipe for lace cookies, and just the name of it intrigued me. So I read through that, and I thought, oh, I can do this. Although there was one ingredient in it of molasses. I did not care for molasses, but I was so intrigued by the opportunity to make a cookie that looked like lace. I was used to chocolate chip cookies or peanut butter cookies or oatmeal cookies, and they were solid. There was never anything with little holes in them that looked like a piece of lace. So I made those cookies, and oh my gosh, what a catastrophe. The dough all ran together on the cookie sheet. There was no cookies, individual cookies. It was lace cookies, and more than likely, they burned in the oven, and it's such a catastrophe. But that's one way you learn, and certainly over 50 years, I remember that 50, 60 years. So sometimes, and we learn from our mistakes. I learned never to make that recipe again, for one thing, rather than to go back and try to make it the best. But I learned that my ideas for what I conjure up in my head, how I think something will turn out, might not always be at the skill level that I have to make it turn out like that. So that I can really remember. I mean, I can see myself standing in our kitchen right then. The Monarch stove was there and the oven was on, and I couldn't believe the results. But anyway, I don't know what the next thing I baked was. I continued to bake, but it certainly wasn't lace cookies.
I can't even imagine that cookie recipe having molasses in it, because when I think of lace cookies, I think of the white, pretty lace doilies that you automatically can think of.
Yes, that's right. And that's what the cookie was supposed to look like, with those nice, fine little holes.
Yes.
It was a dark cookie.
Really dark.
Really dark. Yes, probably with a few burnt edges to it. And I suppose there was a little fragrance of burnt cookie in the house. But that didn't stop me from pursuing baking, because now I'm a dessert baker and I love it, and I love to create recipes, and I realize that everything won't turn out, but having had more experience now through all these years, I do have a better success rate with recipes that I create.
Now, with that cookie recipe, about what age were you when you had that?
I'd say I was probably 7 or 8.
So was Grandma in the kitchen helping you, or were you on your own at that point?
Well, I was on my own. I believe she was in the house, but Mom always had so much work to do. Because of course this was probably the summertime as well, and she had a large garden. She might have been canning. She might have been doing laundry. She might have wanted to clean the house or dust, although it was usually Jackie's and my responsibility to do that. But she might have had homemakers things to take care of, as far as prepare for the next homemakers club meeting. She never sat down during the day to rest. Well, I shouldn't say never. Some days she would, especially if Dad was at the sale ring, she would make tomato soup and popcorn. And that was our lunch, the three of us. And this, Jackie and I think of this because sometimes we thought, well, we needed to eat like horses. So we would take the popcorn and we would put it in bowls, and then we'd have some kind of support underneath that bowl. We got onto our hands and knees, and we'd sit there and we pretend that we were horses. And that popcorn. But Mom liked popcorn far better than Dad did, and so that was a treat for her to make when he would go to the sales ring. And he'd probably go there and have a great hot beef sandwich and a piece of pie and love it.
Well, speaking of Grandpa, what do you think is his defining moment from your memories?
In my life?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it probably, what comes to mind right away is when we deliver eggs in Bismarck. And how in the summertime, Jackie and I would help him. We delivered we had an egg route in Bismarck every Friday. And prior to that, of course, Jackie and I were very involved with chicken chores, getting eggs, feeding the chickens. We had a lot of laying hens on hand. And Mom would often be in charge of then washing eggs, packing them, tying the cartons, the cartons of dozens of eggs individually with cotton string. Then she would pack those egg case boxes. I think probably the most held 13 dozen. And Dad would usually carry cases, and we girls would carry the cartons that were tied together. When we would go to Bismarck in the early morning, Dad had a route that started with different houses, and it started at the east end of Bismarck on our way into town. Then at just ahead of noontime, we would reach some of the professional offices downtown where customers of ours were. And what I remember so much is being so proud and carrying these probably 2 or 3 or 4 dozen of eggs in my arm. Jackie was probably carrying the same. Dad had a case of eggs, and of course he had his blue and white striped overalls. Inside that top upper pocket was his little black 3-ring notebook, and in that's where he kept his tab of who had not paid him, who charged the eggs, and always had change jingling in his pocket. Dad, I think this is probably a reflection from the 30s rather, where there wasn't much money and that he had. And so it was probably very much a satisfactory feeling to carry change in his pocket. So when we would go inside we'd go inside the main door of the office building, get into the elevator, and probably one of my first experiences in riding an elevator, and we'd go up to these different offices, and in the office, and that where Dad's customers would be. But it wasn't so much that just the opportunity to help Dad, but watching him as an entrepreneur in this role, his spirit and his love of people just shone forth. He loved talking to people. He loved making them happy. And satisfied, especially knowing the fact that they were purchasing from him something that our family had raised. And I would watch that conversation between him and the customer. I would watch him oftentimes make change for a $1 bill, because at that time eggs were 50 cents a dozen. I kind of think that even to start with, what I recall, that the eggs could have been 30 cents a dozen. Now Jackie says the layers, the hens, their eggs were 50 cents a dozen. If we had pullets, the first timers, they were 30 cents a dozen because those eggs were smaller. But I so remember just the feeling of satisfaction knowing that I was part of this family. And we all had a role in what we were doing, very similar to how Dad and I raised you girls. We all had an individual role in this family. And I want to cry because it was such a blessing to know that we were doing this together. It didn't matter if it was the family I grew up in or the family that Fred and I raised. And so that's a defining moment with me for Dad.
Togetherness.
Yes, and each family member, it doesn't matter if it's adult or child, realizing the importance that they play in that family. We would often have a china cup. Well, it was an everyday cup that was kept up in the lower shelf of an upper counter, and that's where Dad always put a change from his pocket. And it was always when we needed something, some small amount of cash, we'd go to the cup. And that was as much a part of what I remember on Egg Day. Another thing I remembered on Egg Day was when we'd go to the Red Owl grocery store after all of our shopping experiences, egg delivery and shopping experiences. Oh, and you girls know how I love cash registers, how I love to push buttons. And this in the 1950s and 60s was the era of the neatest cash register ever. And I'd be just engrossed in watching the checker talk to Mom as making friendly conversation, but she was ringing up those purchases and never missed a beat in typing, in punching in an error. But I love to watch her punch those buttons and then cha-ching, and then she'd go on and another cha-ching, and that was, there's just so much part of merchandising that I learned on those Fridays, and with Mom and Dad both.
Yeah, I remember you talking about it, and I think it's even in the book, when you would go to Bismarck, it was a treat to go out to eat.
Oh yes.
Did you have a favorite meal? You hoped the whole time you were driving to Bismarck that you would go to a certain restaurant and be able to have a certain food.
We rarely ate at a restaurant just because we were in Bismarck. The very special times that I would remember eating out was on Mother's Day. Usually every Mother's Day, Grandpa and Grandma Pfeiffer, who lived in Bismarck, were invited to come join us after church and go to Ressler's Cafe in Bismarck. And Ressler's is no longer there. But it was a cafe where really my first time that I ate halibut and the first time that I ate shrimp. And it was a very unique experience because we were pretty much trained in the art of good manners at home. And so that was the time that Jackie's and my good manners had to shine when we were eating out. There were times when on Egg Day and Friday when we were shopping, there was a little hamburger joint downtown called Jack Lyon's Hamburger Stand. Oh, I so wanted to go there because the smell of grilled onions permeated the air of downtown Bismarck, and that really drew me. But my dad, that never happened. We never did go there. But it was a treat to eat out, definitely. We are spoiled now in the fact that we tend to eat out much more frequently. But I certainly appreciate that. To have that as a treat for me as the woman of the home, and knowing that I don't have to fix that meal.
How would Grandma and Grandpa have been as grandparents? Like you mentioned previously, they passed away when we were pretty young. I have a few memories of each of them, and that's about it. So how would they have been as grandparents?
Well, and yes, you have a few memories of Grandpa and Grandma. Louise really has no memories of Grandpa because he died the spring of the year that Louise was born in the fall. And Louise probably has about a few memories of Mom because Louise was only 3 when Mom died. But they were, with what you girls did, showing livestock and around the country. You did this, we did this as a family. And they would have been there supporting you, just like Grandpa and Grandma Knop were. They were there all the time supporting you. It didn't matter where the competition was. They were there. And Mom and Dad would have done that too, because it would have been so unique to them, the fact that of what you were doing in the show ring with market lambs and lambs that we had raised, that and of course Dad is the one who got us involved in the sheep industry to start with. When I married your dad, I said I don't ever want to be around a sheep again. And of course Dad didn't know anything about a sheep, but lo and behold, those things changed. The Lord had something else in mind, and we had more sheep and loved being with sheep until the day we had until we retired and sold them. So it's they would have been very, very supportive of you. And yes, you would have gotten to know them so much better because they would have made the extra effort to be a part of your lives if they could have. But of course, when Dad had arthritis, it was harder for him to get around. Mom died of cancer, and her cancer came up suddenly. And so her trips to come down here and see us were just really cut short very, very quickly. But I'm hoping that each of you have some type of memories of them. Because I often tell Dad, your dad, how, and I don't like to use the word proud, but how totally thrilled they would have been to see the accomplishments that you girls had.
Yeah.
This wasn't supposed to be so teary, but I think when you've had such a satisfying life as I've had, beginning in the 50s with living as the daughter of Jack and Eudora Pfeiffer in our small community of Menoken, and the opportunities they gave me outside of living on a farm in Bismarck with piano lessons, eventually with voice lessons. They were so supportive of Jackie and me to be well-rounded, and especially in the arts. And Bismarck is a fantastic community for being surrounded in the arts, whether you were a child or an adult. And I've often wondered as an adult, where did they ever find the money for those lessons? Somehow they did. I think they learned to do without so that Jackie and I could have those experiences.
You seem like you have a question.
Well, no, I was just wondering where the idea for voice lessons and piano lessons and came.
Mhm.
And was Jackie involved in dance as well at that point, or did that become a passion later?
No, she was involved in dance. I can't really tell you with the timing about what she started first. We had a neighbor gal, Carmen Owen, who took lessons from Mayhew's Conservatory of Music. She was a lot older than we were. She, in her senior recital, I'll never forget this. We went to it. This was a senior in high school recital. She played the song called The Tides of Menoken, and she played it with her foot. I think it was just the one foot. I don't think she had 2 feet on the keyboard at once. I couldn't believe it that I was watching someone play this beautiful piano piece with foot. That's all that I remember was that I don't know how her fingers were involved, but it was her foot was on the keyboard. And I suppose I was about 5 years old at that time. Jackie wanted to take piano because we received our grandma Pfeiffer's piano from our aunt and uncle, Johnny and Ella Zimmerman. They no longer needed it. And interestingly, this piano now has gone through Jackie's daughters. It also now her grandchildren are playing on it. So it's a really special piano. But back to when we started lessons, Jackie then started piano lessons at Mayhew's Conservatory. And Mom said to me, I asked Mom once, why did you start me as a kindergartner in piano? And she said, well, you wanted to. You asked if you could do that. So it turned out that Miss Mayhew's, Belle Mayhew's at Mayhew's Conservatory offered a kindergarten class. And it was a class. We didn't take individual lessons. I believe there were 5 of us in the class, 4 girls and a boy. We sat on these little chairs. And anyway, Miss Mayhew started teaching us about the keys. She had her own certain methods how to do it. Then it was after, and once we got into first grade, and she did it that way. She used birds, the pictures of birds behind each of the keys to help us learn the name of the keys. Because at that time, kindergartners didn't read. So we couldn't read instructions. So she then, in first grade, I believe, is when I started taking individual lessons, and I took from Belle Mayhew's for 13 years. She was certainly an amazing mentor to me in the world of piano, and opened many, many doors for me as a concert pianist with the Bismarck High School Symphony Orchestra, and 2 solo recitals in the town of Bismarck, or in the city of Bismarck. And then when it came to voice lessons, when we came from Menoken grade school, we were there in grades 1 through 8. And Jackie and I have often talked, as have some of our Fun Chat guests with us, that when you go from a country school, then all of a sudden you're thrown into the midst of a big city school. And we did this in 9th grade is when we started going to Bismarck. That was the 9th grade was the last year of junior high in Bismarck. First off, it's difficult. It was difficult for us coming from the country to believe in ourselves, because we're thrown in with all these city kids. And I guess as farm kids, we thought that city kids just were on a higher level than what we were. And our clothing wasn't the same as theirs, our homemade clothing, versus many of those students were purchased clothing. And so first off, you have to get over the fact that who is the person that you are. And it turned out when I was in 9th grade at Simley Junior High, I ended up, I think the first thing that gave me some support for my feelings or understanding was who I was that I had Mrs. Anderson for a math teacher. It was algebra. I took algebra that year. And it was just a few weeks after I had started that, she said to me that I've talked to the principal and I want you to be in advanced, our highest algebra class. And I thought, oh, I didn't know I had that capability. And so anyway, that was a real starting point to me. But then Bismarck High School Concert Choir, under the direction of Boyd Greger, was a marvelous, marvelous, like jewel in your crown, in your musical crown, if you could be a part of that, and especially if you were honored to have been selected through an audition to become a member of that choir as a 10th grader. Many of the people in that choir did not get in until they were juniors and seniors in high school. And so I auditioned for it. Somehow I gained the encouragement in my own soul to do it. And I remember Jackie coming home from, this would have been in the spring of the completion of my freshman year at Simley. And she came home from school because she was in concert choir then. And she said, there are only 3 10th graders that are going to be in concert choir next year. And Mr. Greger announced them today. And he announced these 2 people. And then he said, and now I'm saving the best for the last. And this is Janine Pfeiffer, Jackie's sister. Me? All I ever did was sing for pleasure. He brought such hope to me in that situation. And later on, I became first chair, first alto. And as a junior, between my sophomore and junior years, he asked if I wanted to take voice lessons from him. So evidently he saw potential, and I started doing more solo work in churches in the Bismarck area. Mom and Dad said yes. And again, I thought, where are you going to get the money to pay him for these lessons? But they did. So kind of the rest is history. Yeah. It sometimes takes those teachers to understand who you are and to give you that support. I was still such a timid child. And of course, you girls both know the story, how I used to hide behind mom's skirts as a little kid because I was so afraid of people. I didn't want to talk to anybody and outside of our family. And so just all these stepping stones in life that build up the character of a person and the hope and in the development of a child are so amazing. And teachers are so important as they play those roles.
Very true. Still true today.
Yes. And parents as well. But in our case, it was never suggested in our home that I might have had the skills to do what a teacher saw in me. And or maybe mom and dad didn't even know those opportunities were out there, but a teacher did. Mr. Greger and Miss Mayos, I have to give them such credit for the skills in voice and piano that they gave me.
So going back to Jackie and you, I wanted to know, growing up on the farm in the 50s, didn't have cell phones, you didn't have technology or internet. What were some of the most favorite things that you guys did together?
We played a lot of mud pie. We had a lot of mud pies, but we played a lot of paper dolls. We loved paper dolls, and we designed fashions. We'd take our Big Chief tablet and our color crayons, our Crayola color crayons. We probably only had 6 or 8 in a box. That's all we could. What we got for color crayons, and we would make fashions for our paper dolls. It was such creative play. And Jackie was so especially gifted in the art of fashion design. And so a lot of times as the younger sister, I was 3.5 years younger, I would copy some of her designs, and they never looked as beautiful as hers did. But still, it was a place to start. And in the 50s, the cars had fins on them. That was kind of an added fun feature for a car. And so the fashions that I designed, all the bottom of every dress had fins on it. Had fins on it. And it was so fun to say, okay, now what colors do I want to use for this one? What colors? And I had Doris Day paper dolls. Those were she was my paper doll for whom I designed clothes. But Jackie and I did a lot of horseback riding. I mean, if you wanted to go anywhere as a kid in that area, you had a horse and you rode horse back, either whether it was out in the pasture, out in the field, take lunch out to dad or water out to dad. When he was in the field, maybe it was to go meet up with some friends, Patty and Janine Salter, who lived a half mile from us in the 50s at the time. We did a lot of horseback riding together. Jackie had a horse named Lady, and Janny would ride with her. And I had my stinking little Shetland pony named Ginger, who was so stubborn. Then Patty would ride with me. And so we'd have fun going around. And of course, Ginger never would take the lead. He always followed Lady. And if Lady wanted to go somewhere, I mean, if Jackie wanted to go somewhere, and Patty and I didn't want to go somewhere on Ginger, well, we'd stop and get off of Ginger because he wouldn't turn around. He'd just plant those four legs into the ground. He wanted to follow Lady. And sometimes we got into some tricky situations with that in life. But we learned, but I was so glad when I was in second grade when I got my bike. It was a blue and white bike I named Blue Boy. And finally, I had transportation that was dependable and would go where I wanted to go. I didn't have to depend on Ginger. I don't think I rode Ginger hardly at all after that. So, but I do remember the time we sold him at one of the livestock auctions in the Bismarck Mandan area. And it was a horse sale, a special horse sale. And the big thing was that we had the saddle and the bridle on him. I rode him into the sale ring. And of course, the bidders were bidding. And it seemed to me we took the saddle off, just even at that point, kept the bridle on. I went under his belly. I went between his legs. I slid off his rump, just to show how kind he was. And after the sale, I do remember, even though I was always disgusted with that horse, I do remember going over to the pen where he was put after he was sold and telling him goodbye. But there weren't too many tears shed over that. But horseback riding was a big thing for us in the 50s and even in the 60s. Well, until I got my bike. We probably have time for one more question, then we should wrap it up.
I'll turn it over to you, Louise.
I was going to ask then one more question, and that would be, can you explain further the story of Ginger? And the main story that we all know and can tell our children someday.
Well, I don't know that Jackie would be too pleased with me telling this. We do have it recorded in the book, so that you can probably get a little more intense understanding of the relationship of Ginger and me. But Jackie and I took, as a lot of young girls in the Menoken community, took baton lessons from our neighbor, Millie McCormick. And she was this larger frame, robust, jovial woman. She had been a majorette in a band, with a band, and I don't really know any history about beyond that. But she had this huge silver baton with a big ball on the end, and that's what she used as a majorette to lead the band in parade. We had the opportunity to buy batons, and she taught us either over at the Menoken picnic grounds, or we used the Menoken Township Hall where these lessons occurred. And she became pregnant, and so then kind of quit teaching lessons. But after she had the baby, then Jackie and I and the Salter girls thought, well, we should go see Millie and her new baby. But she lived quite a distance from us. She probably lived about 5, 6, 7 miles from us. This was a summer afternoon. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon when we had decided that we were going to go do this, which was not a good decision, because it was going to we wouldn't have time to get home there and back before dark. Well, that's what happened. And we were riding our horses through the dark back through Dick Salter's field, where there was kind of like a section line path through there, and the horses knew the way home, but we had to drop off Patty and Janny, and then we went the rest of the half mile to our house. Well, it was 10 o'clock when we, at night, the dark of night, when Jackie and I rode in to our barnyard. We weren't that concerned about it because we knew where we were. But Mom, we had no telephone at that point. Mom was fit to be tied. She had absolutely no idea where we were. And you know, when you're a young child, you don't think about that because you know you're okay. But we didn't even have an opportunity to try to call her because we didn't have a telephone. So when we got home from our little trip up to see Millie and her baby, Mom saw us standing at the kitchen window and saw us ride in. She came out of that house and she was so upset. And as a parent, I can understand her feeling. And it wasn't that. Anyway, I got off the horse, and that's the first and only spanking I ever had. And after she gave me the spanking, yeah, true. As soon as she got done spanking me, she said, "Now you go take care of that horse. I mean, you know, I have a responsibility. Now take care of him. He got you there and back. It wasn't him who was the problem. It was your decision."
That's right.
And Jackie had a similar situation. And we learned that was a huge learning lesson for me in particular, because I know I've told you girls that I was a pleaser. If Mom and Dad said to do something, I did it. I didn't make concerns, didn't make problems for them. I just did it. And maybe that had to do with my shy personality. But that was a time when, man, that really had an impact on me, and enough so that I could, you know, your mind, you remember exactly how it all happened. And I won't elaborate on on specifics, but it certainly was a memory maker. And I think what made Mom even more upset was that Dad, when I got into the house, because I got done with what I needed to do first, Dad was sitting there in the living room watching the TV show Cannonball. And Mom had made liver for supper, and I could smell it through the house. And of course, we weren't there, you know, fried liver, and we weren't there to eat it. But I think what was most, thank goodness, I think what was most bothersome to her was that Dad probably didn't share this same deep concern that she did. But as Jackie has said too, that Dad probably in his own way knew that things would turn out okay. But boy, you know, if that would have been you girls and the same thing would have happened, I don't know if I would have I don't know what I would have done, but the frustration and the concern with what happened to you.
It probably would have been about a similar situation. Dad would be calm still, and you would be fired up.
Fired up. Yes.
So mother's love.
Yes, it is. So that's a very memorable time in my life, and certainly impactful one. And yeah, you girls have been there to share it. Now you can share it with your grandkiddos, and we've shared it with the world in our book. Yes. Thank you, ladies. This has been fun. I know people are going to probably comment on, we hope, on this program by liking the program, by subscribing, clicking that little red button, by commenting either here on our YouTube channel or on Facebook when I posted on Facebook to the 1950s Fun Chat Facebook page. We hope you comment, and maybe you had similar situations in your life, but this is some of the story of my life in the 1950s. And my beautiful daughters, Louise and Brittney, are here to share it with me. And hopefully, ladies, you have gained more personal and in-depth insight into the life of your mama. So thank you, ladies. So until next time, folks, we'll see you on the 1950s Fun Chat. Bye-bye.